Would you eat a rock, just to stay alive? But that was only the beginning. The fire crackles under the open sky. Snow falls like silence. It's 10 o'clock at night, in the dead of winter. A pot boils slowly in the center of a starving medieval village. Inside that pot, bones, roots, and a stone. This wasn't a myth. It was dinner. During the harshest winters of the 18th century, when food was gone and the earth froze over, families gathered to make what little they had into something, anything, that could be called a meal. The temperature outside is -20 degrees Celsius, which is equivalent to -4 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the huts, it barely rises above 2 degrees Celsius, around 35.6 degrees Fahrenheit. There's no electricity, no grocery store, just silence, hunger, and the will to survive. A child watches the pot, eyes wide, not because it smells good, but because it means he might sleep tonight with something in his stomach. This was survival, brutal, humble, real, and tonight you'll discover 7 of these forgotten medieval meals that didn't just feed people. They kept entire villages alive. The wind doesn't blow. It cuts. It's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, but the village is already swallowed by darkness. A thick grey sky presses down like a lid over the world. The air is sharp, dry, filled with silence broken only by the distant creak of frozen branches, and the occasional moan of hunger, not from mouths but from walls. Inside the largest hut, smoke curls along the low ceiling, not from a blazing fire, from a handful of embers coaxed into life with dried moss and splinters. A woman sits near the hearth, her skin tight against her bones, stirring a pot slowly, like each turn of the spoon is a prayer. The broth is translucent. It smells faintly of old onion skins and hope. She watches it boil like someone watching the sun rise, wishing it could bring more warmth than it does. Her youngest child, barefoot despite the frost, rests against her arm, asleep. Maybe, maybe not. Outside, the snow crunches under hesitant feet. A boy no older than 12 returns to the door. In his arms, a frozen beet and 3 shriveled leaves. His hands are purple. His face is stiff with pride and frost. He doesn't speak. He doesn't have to. She takes the beet, cuts it with a rusted knife, and lets it fall into the water. The steam that rises carries the faintest scent of sweetness. This is how a medieval family survives winter. Not with plans or weapons, with will, with scraps, with silence. At 7 o'clock at night, the village still breathes, just barely. In the 18th century, nights like this weren't rare. They were routine. Survival wasn't noble. It was necessary. You learned how to fight the cold with layers of straw in your boots, how to conserve heat by huddling together, how to ignore hunger by dreaming of food you once had. You don't learn these things in books. You feel them when there's nothing left to feel but the cold on your skin and the ache in your gut. This is not fantasy. This is forgotten truth. The truth of those who had nothing and lived anyway. Could you face a night like this with no light, no food, no comfort, just the sound of your stomach and the breath of winter against your door? And what they did next would change everything. Write your answer in the comments. Your ancestors might have survived it. Would you? That's when it all turned. The pot is blackened from years of fire. The snow around it is already melting, not from warmth, but from the breath of desperation that clings to the village like smoke. It's 10 o'clock at night, and the only light comes from the flicker of a fragile flame beneath the iron cauldron. One by one, silhouettes approach. Wrapped in wool, silence, and whatever dignity hunger has left behind, no one speaks. They've done this before. A man places a rock inside the pot, smooth, round, not to eat, but to begin, to tell a story older than fire itself. This is not folklore. This is the stone soup. A real ancestral method of survival, passed through famine and frost by those who had nothing but each other. Another steps forward. A woman with cracked hands offers half a turnip, barely the size of a fist. A child follows with an old crust of barley bread, hard as stone. The pot doesn't complain. It receives by 11 o'clock at night. The steam carries the faint scent of community, root, bark, salt, hope. In the brutal winters of the 18th century, when temperatures outside fell to -20 degrees Celsius, which is equivalent to -4 degrees Fahrenheit, and inside the huts barely reached 2 degrees Celsius, or 35.6 degrees Fahrenheit, survival wasn't a choice. It was choreography. There were no rations, no charity, just knowledge, old, stubborn knowledge. The kind that says, if each one brings what they can, everyone leaves with a little more than nothing. Medieval peasants didn't need recipes. They needed resilience. And this soup, born from ashes and instinct, kept entire frozen villages alive. Through nights where death stood just beyond the door, a small boy stares into the pot, watching a piece of onion swirl with a bone fragment. His eyes don't seek flavor, they seek survival. This isn't just food, it's identity, it's ritual, a forgotten technology of togetherness in a world without firewood, without knives, without guarantees. The stone soup wasn't delicious, but it was sacred. And tonight, just like then, it asks you one thing. If all you had was a stone, would you still try to make a meal? But what followed, no one expected. 3 in the morning, the kind of cold that silences everything. Even the owls, even the hunger. A single candle flickers inside a crooked wooden cabin at the edge of a frozen field. The wind claws at the walls like something alive. Inside, a woman sits near a small clay pot. Her breath clouds the air. Her hands are wrapped in cloth, not for warmth, but to hide the cracks from the cold. She stirs slowly, not out of laziness, it's out of precision. Timing matters here, because what she's making isn't just food. It's preservation, memory, a fight against time and rot. This is the fermented gruel, one of the most brutal yet life-saving meals in medieval survival. A blend of mashed grains, dried herbs, and wild roots, left to ferment slowly in the dark corners of earth-covered huts. It smells sour, sharp, almost wrong, but it works. In the brutal winters of the 18th century, when entire villages were sealed in snow and food could not be grown or hunted, fermentation became salvation. No electricity, no glass jars, just instinct, technique passed from mouth to mouth across generations like sacred chants. The woman lifts the lid. Steam rises. It smells like vinegar and barley, like survival. She ladles a portion into a bowl. Her child stirs in his sleep, skin pale, lips cracked. The boy barely opens his eyes, but his hands reach out. She helps him drink. It burns his throat a little, but his eyes close again. This time, not from exhaustion, but from something close to peace. In the background, the wooden walls creak under the weight of the wind. Outside, it's minus 20 degrees Celsius, which is equivalent to minus 4 degrees Fahrenheit, equivalent to minus 4 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside, the temperature lingers around 2 degrees Celsius, just 35.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold enough to stiffen fingers, cold enough to silence breath, cold enough to kill, unless you had something, anything, warm, thick, alive. That's what fermented gruel is. It's not meant to be delicious. It's meant to last, to hold nutrients through days when meat was a memory and vegetables a luxury. It's meant to keep you breathing when the rest of the world is buried under snow. This is no stew. It's a science born from necessity, a form of edible resistance, a spoonful of defiance against a winter that never forgives. And the mothers. Who mastered this? They were the quiet engineers of their family's survival. Without them, no fire would burn, no lineage would endure, no village would remain. She puts the lid back on the pot tightly. There's not much left, but enough, maybe for tomorrow. If this ancient trick and strong, sour, and strange curry surprises you, just imagine how many lives it saved when all else failed. If that revelation moved you even a little, give this video a like and subscribe. We're not done yet. There are still 5 more brutal meals, and some of them are darker than you can imagine. So let me ask you, if the only thing between you and death was a fermented paste, would you eat it? From that moment on, everything shifted. Imagine waking up and heading to the kitchen. You open the fridge, nothing. The light doesn't turn on, there's no hum, just the cold air of absence. There's no milk, no leftovers, no cheese, no meat, not even a slice of bread. Only a damp floor and a puddle of lukewarm water. Now picture this, it's 3 in the morning. Outside it's minus 20 degrees Celsius, which is equivalent to minus 4 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside, just barely 2 degrees Celsius, around 35.6 degrees Fahrenheit. There's no heater, no backup generator, no microwave, humming in the dark, no Uber Eats on the way, no pantry, no apps, no choices. You check your phone, no signal, battery's dead. You wrap yourself tighter in a synthetic blanket, and for the first time in your life, you feel it. True vulnerability. That is the starting point of what a medieval peasant would call just another winter night. In the villages of the 18th century, this wasn't a crisis. It was reality. They didn't count calories. They counted fires, walls, layers, days since the last snowfall, meals since the last market, hours until the sun rose again, if it did. While we panic when the Wi-Fi drops for 5 minutes, they faced wolves in the woods, rot in the granary, disease in their water, and hunger in, bare bones. And they didn't flinch. Why? But that wasn't the end, because they knew how to endure. They knew the techniques, the forgotten wisdom, the signs in the sky. They used fermented gruel when food ran out, drank snow melt from clay cups, and huddled around fires with neighbors they barely knew, because warmth was shared, or not at all. Today, most people panic if the power goes out for a few hours, but back then there was no power, only will, and the will was everything. So let me ask you, what happens when the lights don't come back on? And yet something darker waited. When the supermarkets stay closed, the story didn't end there. When the tap runs dry and the delivery man stops showing up, but the frost wasn't done claiming them. Would you survive a single week living like they did for centuries? And beneath the silence and something moved. Not every meal in the medieval world came from a pot. Some were found between rocks, hidden under frost, whispered through generations, and feared. Deep in the forest, where the light barely touches the ground, the trees bend like they're keeping secrets. It's the middle of the 18th century. 3 boys are following an old man barefoot across the snow. His name is never spoken aloud, but everyone calls him the Hermit. He doesn't need maps. He walks by memory, by instinct, by shadows. He stops beneath a dead tree, kneels, reaches into the cold earth, pulls out a cluster of leaves, jagged, dark, wet. He sniffs them, nods, then crushes one between his fingers. It smells sharp. They're alive. This is the bitter stew of wild leaves. In an age with no medicine, no vitamins, no food preservation, and no second chances, nature became both the enemy and the cure. And only those who listened closely survived the dialogue. The hermit knew which plants fed and which ones killed. He taught that stinging nettle could cleanse the blood and fill the belly, that dandelion roots could draw out toxins, and that dried mushrooms, if not mistaken for their poisonous cousins, could give strength to starving limbs. In frozen villages surrounded by nothing but hunger, this stew wasn't a choice. It was a necessity, made from wild herbs, boiled roots, bark shavings, moss and water, sometimes scooped from hoofprints in the snow. It tasted like punishment, but it healed, slowly, and that was enough. The hermit always warned, one wrong leaf, and it's over. Your tongue swells, your breath slows, your heart forgets to beat, but get it right, and you live another night. So why doesn't anyone talk about this anymore? What lingered next was colder than snow, because most who got it wrong didn't survive to tell the tale, and those who got it right passed the knowledge through riddles, songs, myths, until it became legend, then silence. Today, if your shelves were bare and the forest your only store, would you trust your instincts, but survival had one more lesson to teach? Would you know what to pick, or would the stew choose for you? The darkness hadn't finished its meal. So now pause for a second. We've crossed frozen forests, followed barefoot hermits, stirred pots with nothing but air and memory. We've seen mothers feed their children with sour pastes and grandfathers bless stones before dropping them into boiling water. These weren't recipes. These were weapons against extinction. Now I ask you, as if we were sitting by the same fire, wrapped in fur and silence, if the world ended tomorrow, which meal would you trust to keep you alive? Still, one more shadow remained. The fermented. Gruel, bitter but sustaining, that night wasn't finished with them. The stone soup built from scraps and solidarity, and that was only the beginning of the end. The wild herb stew full of danger and healing, and that was only the beginning of the end. A father once told his son as they shared the last bowl of root broth, "Don't eat for taste, eat for time, for one more sunrise." That's the kind of wisdom that built the backbone of medieval survival, and it wasn't taught in castles. It was whispered in huts, cried over in corners, etched into the frost of wooden bowls passed down through generations. You see, every bite in those times had a cost. Sometimes it was pride, sometimes it was risk. Sometimes it was the simple pain of chewing something that tasted like earth and fear, but meant one more day. And now, here we are, in a world full of flavor, but starving for meaning. So again, what would you eat? And that was only the beginning of the end. Would you trust your instinct, your ancestors, your pain? And that was only the beginning of the end, because the next meal, the one we're about to uncover, wasn't just rare. It was hidden, guarded like a secret, lost in time like a recipe carved into bark and buried under snow. The peasants who made it, they didn't speak of it often. It was too sacred, too strange, but it worked. It saved lives. And tonight, it comes. Back to the firelight, Are you ready to taste a forgotten kind of magic, born from desperation? And that was only the beginning of the end. It starts with silence, the kind that fills a room when no one wants to ask the question, is this all we have? And that was only the beginning of the end. Nearly a full day into a snowstorm. Outside, the wind has buried every path in white. The temperature has dropped to -20 degrees Celsius, which is equivalent to -4 degrees Fahrenheit, which is -4 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the stone cottage, it's not much better. The air clings at 2 degrees Celsius, just 35.6 degrees Fahrenheit. A thin layer of frost hugs the walls. No one speaks. The last beet was eaten yesterday. The bread is gone. The root cellar stands hollow. There's only one thing left, bones, not fresh, not clean, just old dried bones scavenged from discarded piles, rib bones, knuckle bones, sometimes even bird bones scraped from fire pits. The woman places them into the pot. No seasoning, no oil, just water and fire. She lets it boil. 1 hour, 2, 6. By the 12th, a scent begins to rise. Faint, fatty, mineral, a whisper of life. This is the broth of dry bones, one of the most powerful and forgotten techniques in medieval survival. Medieval peasants learned that if you boil bones long enough, something miraculous happens. The marrow surrenders, the collagen breaks, and what remains is strength. A warrior once endured on nothing but this broth. For 3 weeks, no meat, no grain, just the ghost of animals long gone. And still, he walked. Still, he fought. Because this broth wasn't a meal, it was memory turned into energy. A technique carved from desperation and passed from hearth to hearth, the kind of wisdom you don't find in books, but in scars. The children sip it with their eyes closed. They pretend it's soup. They imagine richness, but deep down, they know the truth. It's not food, it's continuation. It's survival, one slow swallow at a time. And in today's world, where we waste more than we cherish, you have to ask yourself, if everything failed, would you know how to survive? With only bones and fire, and that was only the beginning of the end. If this still inspires you on this forgotten art of resilience, give us a like and follow this journey, because the next meal is even darker. Some say a woman once boiled her wedding ring to make the water taste like metal, like memory. What if the silence wasn't just hunger, but something darker hidden in the frost? It is 3 in the morning. Outside, the snow has stopped falling, but the silence it left behind is heavier than the cold. The wind is gone, replaced by a thick stillness, the kind that feels like the earth is holding its breath. In the center of a frozen village, no fires burn tonight. There's nothing left to burn. Branches were used 2 nights ago. The last animal fat was scraped yesterday. There is no smoke, no light, no sound, only the slow crack of ice forming on the inside of the windows. This is the silent supper. Some say a woman once boiled her wedding ring to make the water taste like metal, like memory. What if the silence wasn't just hunger, but something darker hidden in the frost? A night with no food, no options, no illusions. In the harshest winters of the 18th century, when temperatures outside dropped to -20 degrees Celsius, which is equivalent to -4 degrees Fahrenheit, and inside barely held at 2 degrees Celsius, which is 35.6 degrees Fahrenheit. This was not a moment. This was a pattern. The family doesn't speak, not because of discipline, but because speaking wastes energy. The father stares at the sleeping child on the floor wrapped in straw and old fabric, his belly empty, his cheek sunken. The boy is still breathing, but slowly, too slowly. The father's eyes begin to fill. He presses his fist to his mouth. No sobs, just one tear. The mother sits by the hearth, though there is no fire. Her fingers move as if stirring something, though the pot is dry. Her mind still tries to cook, to pretend. Somewhere a branch snaps in the woods, not from an animal, just from cold. Even the trees are breaking. This is when starvation stops being pain and becomes madness. A neighbor once tried to eat candle, wax. Another chewed on leather boots. In one story, passed quietly among villagers, a man boiled river stones again and again, just for the steam, just to give his children a scent of survival. And yet, it is also in this moment that the most ancient form of wisdom can awaken, not knowledge from books, but from bone, from blood, from the spark that says, I refuse to let the cold win, because when the body has nothing left to burn, sometimes the mind finds something no one expected. Would your mind endure a night like this, or would the silence eat first? And that was only the beginning of the end. It is still dark, always dark. The storm has passed, but the cold remains. Inside bones, beneath skin, between people. In one of the stone chapels near the edge of the frozen village, a faint candle glows. Its light trembles as if unsure whether to burn or fade. Inside, a monk sits cross-legged on the frozen floor, wrapped in a threadbare wool robe. His breath clouds the air. His hands tremble, not from age, from hunger, from the kind of cold that doesn't just numb but reaches into the soul. He takes a piece of bread, small, hardened, nearly petrified by time and cold. He breaks it, and then, without a word, he places half in the hand of the man beside him. That man passes a crumb to the child in his lap. The child doesn't ask questions, just chews. This is the spiritual supper, a meal not made of calories, but of connection, of presence. In the 18th century, during some of the most brutal winters in recorded history, when outside temperatures dropped to -20 degrees Celsius, which is equivalent to -4 degrees Fahrenheit, equivalent to -4 degrees Fahrenheit, and the inside of stone buildings hovered around 2 degrees Celsius, which is 35.6 degrees Fahrenheit. This supper was salvation in another form. Medieval peasants didn't just share food. They shared weight. They shared silence, warmth, prayers, and sometimes a small smile from across the fire, meaning, I see you. You are not alone. That bread, broken and dry, meant more than any feast. It carried memory, unity, a kind of sacred resistance. The monk speaks only once. Hunger weakens us, but together we feed each other with more than food. And for one fragile moment, in that frozen chapel, warmth exists, not in the air, not in the hands, but in the eyes of those who received what little there was. Because in times of absolute scarcity, survival sometimes comes not from the pot, but from the palm, not from fire, but from faith. So let me ask you, if everything was gone, the power, the food, the comfort, would you still know how to feed someone with just a piece of yourself? And that was only the beginning of the end. It's still dark, but now it's a different kind of darkness. Not the one outside. That one is predictable, icy, relentless, expected. This one is internal, because after hearing what they ate, how they endured, how they fought the cold with soup made of bones and leaves, with nothing but fire and faith, a question begins to whisper in the back of your mind. What would I do if this was me? And that was only the beginning of the end. No, not in an apocalypse. No bombs, no science fiction, just winter, a real one, like those of the 18th century, when the wind burned like fire, and even inside the stone homes it remained. Just 2 degrees Celsius, which is 35.6 degrees Fahrenheit, where the snow didn't fall for days, it stayed for months, where silence wasn't peaceful. It was proof that life was hiding. Now think, what would your last supper be? And that was only the beginning of the end. A processed snack you bought weeks ago? A box of cereal? Something that expires in 3 days? And that was only the beginning of the end. Or would you finally remember how to make food from what's left? Would you know how to ferment roots, boil marrow, dry fish, grind bark? Would you know how to share the last piece of bread without fear? And that was only the beginning of the end. Would you remember the taste of humility? And that was only the beginning of the end. Medieval peasants didn't wonder if they could survive. They knew they had to. There was no option, no hotline, no rescue, only each other and time. That's what medieval survival is really about. Not suffering, not violence, but preparation, observation, transformation, taking what little the world gives and turning it into strength. And so, before we reach our final fire, I ask you, if tomorrow you lost the world you know, would you know how to create a new one? With your own hands? And that was only the beginning of the end. They ate what we fear, stones, bark, bones, and not because they were desperate, but because they were alive. In the forgotten corners of frozen villages, wrapped in wool and silence, they found ways to turn almost nothing into survival, into communion. A hard root became soup, a fermented leaf, medicine, a dry crust, a reason to keep breathing. They chewed bitterness without complaint, drank shadows, stirred memory into every pot. And when there wasn't enough, for one they shared with 3, because surviving wasn't just a matter of eating, it was a ritual of resistance, a pact between skin and spirit. When the cold of the 18th century clawed through doors, when the wind sliced through walls, when hunger knocked louder than hope, they didn't panic. They remembered. They listened to the fire, to the bark underfoot, to the silence between heartbeats. And somehow they made it through, together, one spoon at a time. This raw, cold, beautiful defiance of death, this is what we call medieval survival. Not a fantasy, not a legend, but a truth buried beneath the snow, and still warm. If this journey through medieval survival stirred something ancient within you, then you are no longer just a viewer. You are now part of our brotherhood of ancestral guardians. Subscribe now and carry this fire forward, a flame that has survived frost, famine, and the silence of forgotten time. Tell us in the comments, which of these ancestral techniques would you trust first to keep your family alive through a brutal winter? Your answer might awaken a memory the world didn't know it had. Leave a like, and not for us, but for the mission. Each like strengthens this path of remembrance. Each share passes the torch to another soul wandering in the dark, because to preserve knowledge is to preserve life. And before the cold returns, look to the next fire appearing on your screen. It holds more than stories. It holds tools, truths, and trials that may shape your survival when the lights go out.